Looks like the same drawing.
Morning site visit on my way to work. On my
One of those two.
freaked them out a little bit. Morning somewhere.
Somewhere it is, yes.
Great.
That place a long, long way from here.
Okay, everybody signed in again?
Exactly right by sign.
If everybody's ready, we'll bring the meeting to order. Everybody ready? Perfect. Okay. Thanks everybody for coming to the Town of Williston's Development Review Board for Tuesday, July 25, 2017. We're going to bring the meeting to order at 7:05. This is a reminder that everybody, please make sure that you've signed in. A couple of people coming in now. We have 5 items on the agenda for tonight. First up is DP 09-01, and it is an amendment number 12 for Snyder Commercial Properties. I'm going to recuse myself, and Pete Kelly is going to run the hearing.
Okay, thank you, Scott. The applicant, please come forward. Good evening, familiar faces. If you'd please state your name and address for the record, please.
Yeah. Chris Snyder with Snyder Finney Crossing Commercial Properties in Shelburne.
Andy Rowe with Lamoureux and Dickinson.
Eric Hoekstra with Redstone in Burlington.
Okay, welcome. As is customary, staff goes first.
Okay, so this is a request for pre-application review. This is amendment number 12 to DP 0901. DP 0901 is the discretionary permit that covers all of the development of Finney Crossing. The work on that goes, I don't know if it goes back into the last century, but almost. It was originally approved by the DRB in 2007, and this is amendment number 12, so it's been amended 11 times. And that's not by design, because it was understood when Finney Crossing was going to move forward that it would be done in phasing, and the detailed approval of various sections of it would be done in phases. This phase is particularly noteworthy because it's the first part of Finney Crossing that is not residential. This is a request for potentially a 100-room, 3-story hotel. Up until now, all the development in Finney Crossing, other than the infrastructure, has been residential, whether single-family or multifamily residential. And it was always understood that the portion of the land holdings of Finney Crossing in the immediate vicinity of Williston Road would be some form of commercial, whether it was office, retail, hotel. A hotel use is considered to be a permitted use in this zoning district. So that this is the first time we've looked at anything that's not residential is significant. A couple of things about this particular request. So it's pre-application. So the level of detail of the submittal is by design fairly sketchy. We haven't seen elevations. That was not part of the submittal. Basically what we have is a site plan, showing the location of streets, parking lots, buildings, etc., without detailed engineering. This is the time when the board would potentially ask for additional information, whether it's a wetland delineation or a traffic study. There may be other things too, a shared parking analysis. Staff is recommending that we get a traffic analysis with a submission for a discretionary permit. We also think a shared use parking study would be appropriate, given that there's going to be a confluence of different types of uses all in this immediate area. And certainly a longtime concern, I think, of our regulations and the board has been to not overpark areas and to not see the area become completely dominated by parking lots, which there is the potential for that to occur. So this building as proposed does not have any of its parking underground. It's also proposing to move around what was thought to be the location of some of the streets in Finney Crossing in this portion of the development, as well as what was a fairly large green and focal point that would have been visible, I believe, at the end of Boxwood Street coming off of Williston Road. So there's some things there for the board to think about and kind of chew on a little bit. One thing that I would note about the site design is the parking lot is proposed to be immediately in front of the building. And as I mentioned in the staff notes, there is some language in the bylaw that says very specifically that we want buildings to come up to the sidewalk. So that's also something for the, the board to think about and to discuss. So you have commentary from the HAC. They made a number of recommendations. And having said that, I'm going to stop.
Okay, thanks, Ken. Now it's your turn to walk us through the project, and I'd be interested in hearing about the street relocation and also about the what you were thinking about in terms of the parking in light of what Ken said with regulation.
Certainly. Let me start sort of at the beginning. So we purchased the commercial property back in July, and since last July, we have been in front of the board for the revision of the overall site plan to include apartment building number A1, A2, and A3, which are in the northern portions. And they also include not just the buildings, but also the necessary parking and infrastructure required under the Velco easement. So I think that one component is important to remember, that there is this large easement that is overhead, and we have to be very conscientious about the Velco easement. We had some good comments from both the board and staff when we were getting the permits for these three buildings about focusing on small neighborhood usable park areas. And so we did address those during the permit process, and I think it really improved the sight lines and also the visual lines that you see through the project, and also from Zephyr Road and also from Williston Road. We are excited about proposing the first commercial component, and I'd like to just say we're really proposing the first quadrant, right? So we really have four quadrants here. We have the northwest corner, the southwest corner, southeast half. All we're really talking about is this area in this road section here of Boxwood and Collins. We are proposing a hotel, which is a goal of the bylaw, is to see growth of this type of facility within the growth center. We are proposing changes to the grid streets, and what we've decided is, and we've seen how the grid streets are working, right? Zephyr Road, if you drive on Zephyr Road or walking along Zephyr Road in the morning, you'll notice that it's not all people who live on Zephyr Road who are using Zephyr Road. So that loop connection is working. And the other loop connection that people probably don't realize as much is people who live in this neighborhood over here in the hamlet are connecting, and then also this connection over off here off Stillwater that connects over by the Morris Switzer building. I saw people walking and biking and driving. So I think one of our ideas here is increasing the use of the grid streets. And so the idea that we've moved to here is having Boxwood, because Boxwood is a fixed location, because there's already existing traffic light here, right out of Maple Tree Place. And there's already a stoplight facing this future intersection. And what we did is, rather than go straight in and dead end into park, what we've created is a grid street. So Holland Street, Holland Lane, Boxwood turns into Holland, actually now will connect all the way down to Zephyr. And so we've created another grid street to take people from one area to another. Now, are people going to take this road as a through road? Probably not. And there's a couple of reasons why. Boxwood has a 10-foot wide landscaped median island in the center section. So as you're sitting here in Maple Tree Place and looking across the Williston Road, you're going to see this landscaping buffer line. And it's not going to be that conducive to going straight through. Then we have parking along the road and a substantial jog in the road so that you can then connect to Holland. So we envision that, yes, it's a grid street, but it's also going to be a slow moving grid street, and creating this area in which when all four quadrants of the commercial are being used and built, that you'll come and stop, turn, and utilize the access points into here. So I think that's important. We did widen Boxwood. So one of the areas of concern was, right turn out of Boxwood, and so we did address that. We also shifted Market Street to the north a bit from the existing project, and the reason for that is we wanted a little bit more backup space along Boxwood in case there was traffic stopping there. I forgot to mention, this is a four-way stop, is what we're being proposed. And Andy can certainly talk to the rationale for the four-way stop. Continuing along the same idea that we had when we came in for A1, A2, and A3, we really like the idea of these small, usable park spaces. And we've done the same thing along this corridor. You're going to notice that we haven't done that here, not because we're trying to avoid doing those, but we don't really know what building F is going to be, and where it's going to be, and how it's going to be positioned. Again, this is still just a fixture point. But we are proposing this larger park area adjacent to Building H, a park area here in the corner, so as you drive in, you see this component, and there'll be some pavers and those components. Another one here across the street, so again, creating connectivity between the two spaces, and then continuing down. So these are the approved areas already proposed along Holland Lane. So we're just continuing and augmenting some of those small spaces along Holland Lane. This green space, we really are excited about, planning for utilization of it, and not having it just wide open space in the center. We're proposing at some point we will come in, and the hope is that this is a restaurant, and that uses a patio and be able to go outside for when we do have a nice summer night or afternoon, that you might be able to go outside when it's not raining. One thing I do want to note is that came up during one of our previous meetings is we understand that we're going to have to come in for a master sign plan for the commercial portion of the property. We have one for Finney Crossing in general for the entry points, but not necessarily for the specific uses within, and so we know we need to address that in our discretionary permit application. And those are the rationales behind our revision of the road connection, and I'm going to let Eric talk a little bit more about the specific hotel. But if you have any questions, I can answer those now too.
Do we want to talk Grid Streets first, or how do we want to do it?
Yeah, let's do the streets now.
Okay.
I agree with the staff notes as well as the hack about pushing the hotel up and potentially extending Curtis Lane all the way down to Market Street. To me, it actually makes a lot of sense to continue that connection through. The other thing that was lost, there's a potential down the road where judge companies may redevelop their property. And I think on the original site plan, there was a connection all the way to the property line on that one. I'm not saying they have any sort of proposal, I'm just saying
Right.
10, 15 years down the road, it may make sense to have a connection through.
Andy was saying that there may have been an easement, a future easement reserved. So, can I answer the Curtis Lane question first? One of the ideas on Curtis Lane that we had, and we've listened to the staff and both the HAC committee, and obviously didn't want to make changes until we were sitting in front, but the idea of what if we created a pedestrian path rather than a vehicle path along Curtis Street, or Curtis Lane, so it basically ends, and then creating this a pathway so that we get people who are living in all these residential units a bigger access point, a wider access point, rather than having cars go along that. And that was just an idea that we had in the last week or so since the discussion with the HAC. Would that satisfy the connectivity component?
I don't know how everyone else feel about that.
I'm comfortable with that idea. Just, I think, I mean, there's already connectivity in several places here. I'm still concerned about the other issue that's been brought up with the parking and whether the building is right on
I
the
think
sidewalk,
either
but-
case, that would have to be pulled all the way forward, with the parking behind or to the side of it. That's in the bylaws.
I think having a place, I mean, we're trying to promote pedestrian movement here, and I think that the walking on a path that's not got cars on it is always a pleasant experience.
Any other comments about the
Michael?
Curtis Lane?
Anything?
I mean, I think naturally the building being pushed towards the street makes far more sense than having a parking lot before, but that's just, I'd like to hear more about how we ended up, I'd like to see more of the design, how it all got fleshed out a little bit, so.
In terms of, one thing about the parking and where the building is located versus, so flipping the hotel and the parking, you know, it's interesting, we are looking obviously at this specific application, but the other piece that we think is important is the visual line in the bylaw speaks to being against the roadway. In this case, this building in the parking is actually not against the roadway. There is a gap or green space, and then visually from Williston Road, looking north, this parking is set behind other buildings. So there are some rationale as to why we designed it the way it is, and you know, I certainly can let Eric speak to some more comments about that as well.
Any other questions about the grid system or pedestrian access? Okay.
I mean, yeah, one comment I saw in here somewhere, and again, I I wasn't on the board when the original site plan was ever presented here, but I hear discussion of kind of that visual access along where Boxwood Street is, was kind of ending with a nexus of, a terminus of a green space, and now it's just the kind of curve of Holland Lane, and, I mean, I understand what you're talking about, but I'm just trying to get the sense of kind of why you felt that that was important to change that concept.
Yeah, so when you have a T in a commercial entry point, you have a choke in terms of how vehicles will move around. And so the idea was that eliminate the T and create the road through there so that people can move more consistently through rather than coming in and having to stop and going right or left, no matter what. And so that was the idea of the connective piece of Holland Lane. Does that make sense?
Yes. Doesn't mean I necessarily agree with it, but it does make sense.
Okay. And we certainly have had people look at that, and landscape architects look at that piece. And, you know, our experience has been, you know, we have heard comments that the green space at Maple Tree Place has not worked as it was everybody envisioned it being able to work. And it had driveway or parking around it all the way on all four sides. And we felt that this was a good way to shift away from that piece and make it more usable and connected to some other buildings.
Any other questions on the road system, the grid system?
Once these were approved as part of this, it's pretty much the build out of the road system in this, on this site, it seems like.
That's correct. That's correct. These are not, that's correct.
So each of these amendments as we move along kind of solidifies the overall development a little more. I mean,
It does.
Because we don't really know, you've got some nice gray boxes on the plan for buildings, you know, A through J or something here. But we really don't know what those are, if those are really going to be like that in the future.
We don't know exactly what they're gonna be in terms of size and also dimensionally, but what I can say is that we have heard since 2000 that for the last 17 years that along Williston Road, we need to face buildings along Williston Road. And all the designs that we've always shown have that. And that's always been an important component to the design. So I don't think that we, as the developers of the property, could ever walk away from that responsibility. And I don't think we want to. I think in the bylaw, probably, if we looked at the bylaw, would say that we'd have to do that, no matter what. And so I think this component along Williston Road, this is the only anomaly piece to Williston Road. And again, it's because of the Velco easement, that the only thing you can really put in the Velco easement is parking lot. And so rather than using, you don't really want to put public open spaces under the Velco easement because of how the uses are, can be, how can be used. So I think we're very comfortable saying that along Williston Road, this perspective is going to be the same perspective that we've always planned for.
The one concern I do have, Chris, is we have things like Lot 30 that was developed.
Yes.
And we end up basically with, you know, a nice looking backside of the building that's facing the street essentially, because no one's going in that side.
Agreed.
And that's the concern that could happen here, and I'm hopeful that we can find a way to avoid that. And I don't think there's an easy solution to that with it facing Route 2. But I think we need to be really thoughtful about how we're going to proceed with this.
Because of that.
Exactly.
issue. That is I drive by there almost every day, and I would agree with you. I probably only seen 1 or 2 people along that's the main roadside. I don't really know how you resolve that.
For some reason, it seems like CVS works better, the way they have their setup. I feel perfectly comfortable entering in from the Route 2A side, but they don't even have, most of the establishments don't even have an entrance at Lot 30.
Yeah.
And so I think just making it so it's inviting, no matter if you're parked in the parking lot or if you're walking along Route 2, that's gonna be important.
So maybe there's some ways to do that with the architectural design of those buildings, and creating some gaps, right? So what we've shown here is there are some gaps here, and so maybe when we come in, and I think these are valid points, that and we should keep notes of this, that let's say building C gets built, when we come in, we need to show some sort of entry component, just like you talked about at the CVS. I mean, they have more of a patio out on that corner shot. And so if we do that and create these alternative pathways through, that might be at least showing people that you can do that. Yeah. I think this bike path will actually get used more because we got all these residences now using the bike path. And are they gonna rather come in along here and go across a parking lot? Or are they gonna come down here and go down the bike path and go in the front door? So I agree with you. We need to create more activity along Williston Road. But I think it's something we gotta work on.
Yeah.
The grade's also a little more conducive to make that more inviting from Williston.
Flip to that side.
Proposed development areas. And then I made another site visit in late May late May, I can't remember the exact date. And it was also, there was no flooding that was occurring. It was a fairly wet spring, and there was no significant pooling going on anywhere other than the Class 2 wetland.
If you'd like, I can comment a little bit on the historical flooding that has occurred here. Basically, what happened is where you have the drainage, this was a borrow pit. I'll start further back. They ceased operations, we believe, in the late 70s, early 80s. And by the time in 1986, when this was bought, then they had been finished there for a while. So what they did back then is they didn't provide for stormwater drainage. And so what you had is it wasn't necessarily that the whole thing was a low point, but where you see the current drainage lines, that was high. There's piles of fill in there. And so what was happening was the water wasn't able to go down to the Sunset Hill culvert. And what happens is when you have enough water in the system, it saturates. And then any water over top of that goes directly down into, and goes down towards that culvert. So we came to the town and we asked them if we could do some stormwater drainage, and that was all okay. We made sure everything was good. So we went in and we basically just removed some of those piles of fill that were there, and we created a ditch. And ever since then, this land here in the center has been a meadow. And I didn't use that word. That was the Conservation Commission, Melinda from the Conservation Commission, who went out there and she said, yes, those are her words. It was a meadow. But before that material was removed there, this did retain a lot of water, even though the valley bottom is on the other side.
And approximately when were those piles removed?
I believe 2 years ago.
So recently? I mean, near, not 25 years ago, but,
2015 and 2016.
okay, thank you.
Sir, can you state your name, please, just for the record? Mr. Levy?
Yeah.
Can you state your name for the record?
I'm sorry?
Can you state your name for the record?
Yes, Anthony Rubin.
And your address, please?
Yeah, 1811 Fellows Point Road, North Hero, Vermont.
Very good, thank you. Got to do that with anybody who wants to comment. Keep going.
I was out there yesterday, I was out there a few weeks ago, down near the Sunset Hill culvert, there's a high water mark that's made by just grass, and let's say that's flowing on top. And basically you can more or less tell what the high water mark is in the springtime by going out and seeing where the highest elevation of that grass is. So what I could see as a fluvial geomorphologist is that that ditch was conveying some water. This season, which happened to be a very wet season, the water, it looks to me like that drainage ditch worked well. It conveyed the water out, and then I was there yesterday after the rain that we had, and it was totally dry, that ditch. And then in terms of erosion, you have what's called armoring. So you have the cobbles or the stones or the sediment that's on that drainage ditch. You have it not being eroded out and being deposited somewhere else, but you have it like it's a stable feature. So what that tells me is that there's no banks that are collapsing. There's no big, large volume of water flowing through there that would compromise that ditch, that it's the natural drainage pattern, because there is quite a bit of water that comes down off that hillside in these, rainy events, and it has to go somewhere. And it's the same everywhere.
What else?
So some of the other concerns related to wetland and wildlife. We did have, as Matt mentioned, we had Tina Heath come back out to the site and re-verify that wetland delineation was accurate and still true. So we've been able to show here none of the building envelopes or building lots rather are within that wetland buffer. None of the proposed regrading we would propose to do for the flood proofing is within that wetland buffer, and that's all being protected and maintained within the open space. And then per the recommendation of the Conservation Commission, Kristen Howell also prepared a habitat disturbance assessment that was submitted to the Conservation Commission, and based on my meeting with them on Tuesday, they were fully on board with her findings. The only other comment that I had note of that came up during the last meeting was a potential impact of the leach field or the houses in the source protection area. There is a public water well for the Williston Fire District on the opposite property on the other side. Our leach field is located outside that source protection area, so there'll be no additional review required or anything we'll have to go through at the state level in order to get that leach field permitted due to the source protection area. And, a proposed 2 houses just on the edge of that source protection area is not an uncommon use within those. If you look across the street at, say, the Pine Brook Drive development, that's pretty much entirely within the source protection area, and that's a much more densely populated area that's got a lot more residential activity going on. And it's not anything uncommon for a couple houses to go right on the outskirts of the source protection area. Nothing that would really risk contamination of that public water supply.
The distance, the radius out of the source protection area is what, 100 feet?
The isolation area is a 200-foot radius. We're well off of that. In fact, none of that pure isolation area even falls on the Northern Holdings property. So we're about, I want to say, 300 plus from the actual water well.
Okay. Questions from the board? Okay. Anything else?
But if you're good.
I don't know if we're good. It's not a question I can answer easily. Did you read the comments of the Williston's Fire Department?
Yes.
Okay.
So my understanding there is part of the pre-application process. We haven't fine-tuned what the exact solution is going to be, but there are some options on how we could accommodate their requirements if we were, required to do so as we move the project on.
Cistern, tank, or pond?
Exactly.
Yep. Okay. All right. So you're aware of that. Okay. Other questions from the board? No? We have any questions from the audience? Okay, very good. Thank you for coming.
Thank you.
We're going to close DP 17-29 at 9:07. Okay, certificate of appropriateness, HP 18-01.
There you go.
Town of Williston. 6 2x3 interpretive signs